And I don't want you to always think that it's not appropriate. I mean, it's okay sometimes to get in your spouse's circle, right? Well, good evening, North Road Church, and this is our second week of Marriage Moments, and we're really excited to bring this next thing to you because it is such a presence in most marriages, if not all marriages, and that is the subject of fighting or arguing or discussing loudly. However you want to describe it, most couples get to a place where they have a disagreement and they have to work that disagreement out. And there was a study done some years ago that would predict or could predict with 90+% accuracy whether or not a couple would survive, a marriage would survive, based not on whether they fought or how often they fought, but just on how they fought.
And if you're anything like me, you don't typically like conflict, but what I have noticed is that conflict can really be a gift. And I know you're thinking, how in the world is this a gift? It does not feel like a gift right now, but it can really be an opportunity of growing ourselves, serving others, and even glorifying God.
Yeah. So we want to give you 4 helpful tips today on how to fight fair. So that's the goal. The goal is to fight fair, not to avoid fighting, not to, obviously limiting fighting or limiting these hard discussions isn't necessarily a bad thing, but when you do, there's going to be some times, and I think that's a marker really of a healthy marriage, is that you care enough to disagree, right? You care about the relationship, you care about the family, you care about your situation enough to be passionate about a particular direction, and so you have these conflicts. So the first one, four helpful tips. The first one is cooperation. So one of the things we need to remember is that we need to have, the goal is mutual understanding, not necessarily to win, and we'll get into more of that a little bit later, but if you understand your spouse, if you can get to a place where you fully understand where they're coming from or where he's coming from, where she's coming from, I think that is huge. And we just need to remember that this marriage thing, it's a team sport. This is not golf, right? This is a team sport. We're playing on the same team. We're trying to accomplish the same goal, and that is to glorify God through our relationship. So always remember that we need to cooperate together. Don't because the enemy is really good at and tries really hard to make you feel like you're on your own. You're by yourself. You're on your own team, and you're fighting against one another. But just remember that passage in Ephesians 6. Our battle is not against flesh and blood. It is against demons and principalities and forces of darkness in the heavenly places. So as much as your spouse may look like the enemy, may smell like the enemy, and maybe even sometimes may act like the enemy, your spouse is not the enemy. You guys are on the same team.
So a good formula to follow is in James 1:9, and that is quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. And a lot of times what we like to do is the opposite, and that is quick to speak, quick to make sure that they're hearing us so that we get our point across, and then quick to become angry.
So a really wise person in my life, one of my mentors, used to say all the time, never fight a fight you don't win anything for winning. And that it really rang true with me because sometimes, I don't know about you, sometimes I get in the middle of a debate and it ceases to be about whether or not who's right or who's making a good point or what is right. It just becomes, I got to win this argument. And that gets really dangerous. And it reminds me of 4-year-old soccer, right? So I coached my 4-year-old, my oldest son, when he was 4 years old. I coached his soccer team. And there was this one time that he literally stole the ball from his teammate, dribbled down the field, and scored in their own goal, right? That's 4-year-old soccer. He didn't know what he was doing. He was just, he thought he did a really good thing. But I think a lot of times in marriage, we do that same thing. We think we've really accomplished something, and the reality is that we've just scored on our own team. And so never fight a fight you don't win anything for winning.
And so something that we like to do is to play Rate Your Disagreement, okay? And so when you get into a disagreement, you just want to rate it from 1 to 10. 1 being, it's not my favorite, but it's not that big of a deal to me, and 10 being over my dead body. Yeah. And there's even a conflict card that goes with that kind of help you see the numbers 1 through 10, and we can even put that in the comments, because a lot of times we might even be fighting about things that are really not that big of a deal to us, but we just aren't able to see the other person's perspective.
Yeah. So honest disagreement is a good sign of progress. I mean, I think it's important in any relationship to know that if it's okay to disagree, and we've had several of those in our relationship. Some things, some petty things like what color should the hardware be in our master bedroom closet, to how should we handle dating with our son who's getting older. I mean, on those things, that there's some of those are less important, some of them are more important. But I think it's important in our relationships as we walk through this whole thing that we understand that a healthy disagreement is not a bad thing. Again, said it earlier, it means that you care. It means you care about the family. It means you care about the relationship, and you're fighting for that.
Yeah, and the key word there is honest, because you want to be honest with your spouse whenever you are rating that disagreement. Like, you can't just claim, oh, yep, that's a 10 for me every time. So that's not going to work.
Yeah, that doesn't work. Yeah.
If this is a problem for you, you may even want to write your answers down first and then show the other one.
All right, so the next is ownership. We talked about cooperation. Ownership means that you're going to own whatever part of the conflict belongs to you. So you get to the end of this thing, and maybe there's been this big disagreement, and it's time to make up, right? Or it's time to apologize, or it's time to recognize who owns the responsibility for this situation. And ownership just means that you honestly and objectively look at the situation and own whatever part belongs to you. And one of the things that's really important to understand about that is that I've done a lot of marriage counseling, and I've never found a couple where I sat down with them and at the end of that counseling session, I could look at one or the other and say, it's all your fault. The reality is that at the end of those sessions, the vast majority of the time, it's pretty close to 50-50, maybe 60-40. But even if it's 99% one person's fault and 1% the other person's fault, the person who has the 1% needs to own that 1%. And in fact, there's a phrase that we use to talk about that, and that's that we just need to draw a circle around ourselves and fix everything inside of that circle.
Let's just illustrate that for them.
Okay, yeah. All right, so we talked about this principle that you need to draw a circle around yourself and fix everything in that circle. And so we've illustrated this with hoops, right? And this is pretty accurate, to be honest with you. I've got 9 balls in my circle. She has 1 in hers, right? And so we're gonna have this little interaction to just kind of illustrate how this works. A lot of times, okay? And we're in the middle of an argument, and I say something to Roxanne like, Roxanne, you're being so indecisive. Look, you've got this, you're indecisive, you never make up your mind, you're costing us a lot of time.
If you aren't so impulsive, maybe
don't worry,
wouldn't
listen,
have to...
don't worry about these. We're gonna deal with this right now.
I mean, there's a lot that...
I know, but mine aren't as big a deal as yours. Yours is the thing that's causing the issue right now, so... You see where that's going? It really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And the Bible talks about this, that we should remove the plank from our own eye before we deal with the speck of dust in the other person's eye. The reality is, though, I mean, we joke about this, and I often think that a lot of times it's the case that I have far more issues in my circle than she has in hers. But most marriages look more like this, right? We have this equal amount of struggles. And what we need to do is within our circle, we need to grab the things that are in my life that are causing chaos and conflict in a relationship, and I need to deal with that. So I'm an impulsive person, so I need to work on that and deal with that and get rid of my impulsiveness.
And I can be indecisive, and so I just need to deal with my stuff and worry about me and not about him.
And I have a tendency to lose my temper, and I'm kind of selfish sometimes. You get the point, right? If we would both just work on our own issues in our own circle and get rid of those things, then eventually we have fewer things that are causing chaos and conflict in our relationship. Okay, so in that illustration, if you noticed, I had 9 balls in my circle, and all of them represented different ways that I owned the conflict they had, but my focus wasn't on the things that I had in my circle. My focus was on the ball that was in her circle.
And this is huge, because if Satan can get you to focus on your spouse's problems and your spouse's issues and not your own, then he has you beat. Satan hates your marriage. He wants to destroy it. And Ephesians 6 tells you who the real enemy is, and it is Satan.
All right, so the next one is respect. Steer clear of contempt in arguments where you get to the point where you're going after the person's character and you're starting to belittle that person. Or maybe even deeper than that, literally on the inside of your heart, in the deepest part of your heart, you just have disdain for that person. Guard your heart from that. And I want you to know this. I want you to know that this is more of a choice than you think. Our culture says that you fall in love and you fall out of love and you fall into hate and you fall out of hate. But the reality is that our choices, our daily small choices in our life, steer us towards that kind of feeling in our heart. And it's super important. The Bible says in 1 Peter 3:7 that husbands, we should live with our wives in an honorable way, understanding way, and treat them with respect. And then Ephesians 5, and Roxanne will get this in a minute, talks about.
Yeah, Ephesians 5 is really important for the wives because it commands the wives to unconditionally respect our husbands. And that's huge because of the way that God wired them to have as a need for this respect. And so women, what we want to do is just encourage them, appreciate what they do and the way that they work hard. So some of the things that we do is just in our home, I'll say, hey guys, isn't daddy awesome for fixing that thing that was broken? And then what I find is the kids end up picking up on that and that they'll be more appreciative as well.
And I think a way that the guys, we can practice this with our wives is that we always speak well of our wives in public. We always lift her up. We always exalt her and show her love, not just in private, not just saying the words "I love you," but showing her love by treating her well at every opportunity that we have. And I want you to know, guys, this is huge for us. In that 1 Peter 3:7, it says that we need to treat our wives in an understanding way and with respect so that our prayers are not hindered. That's that's probably one of those weighty verses for us as men in this relationship that I know of, that if we're not treating our wives with love and understanding and respect, then we can't expect to have an open line of communication with God.
So the last way to fight fair is empathy. Did you know that research has shown that 90% of all arguments could be resolved if we would just step into one another's shoes and see their point of view? So this is kind of interesting for right now. Something that I have noticed whenever I think about Greg and what he's dealing with is just to see how he's doing. There's a lot of change going on right now, okay? And we want to know how our spouse is dealing with stress. And so a lot of times, even before bed, we'll just kind of look at each other and go, okay, how are you doing? How are you handling this? How are you processing this? Or I'll just kind of be sensitive to what Greg needs. Maybe we have a lot of humans in our house right now. And so I know that can be stressful, and maybe your spouse is getting overwhelmed. And sometimes we might need a Walmart trip.
Yeah, so that's when she sees that I'm just about to lose my mind. She says, "Hey, Greg, we need something from Walmart. Why don't you make a Walmart run?"
Yeah, does that help?
It actually does help a lot.
Yeah, and so you might even be experiencing some even heavier grief, because really what grief is it's just a response to a loss. And right now you might be experiencing that because there's a lot of changes or maybe expectations that are not met. And so we just really need to be considerate of that. Proverbs 13:12 says, "Hope deferred makes the heart sick." And so we just really want to lean into our spouse and see how they're kind of dealing with some of the changes.
Yeah, and guys, we need to do the same thing, and we need to try to see that in our wives. And there's all the jokes about trying to understand a woman. Guys, we're equally as difficult to understand from a woman's point of view. But it is hard to understand our wife completely. And ladies, there's some ways that you can help us though. So there's a communication thing that you do with your friends that is not native to your husband, generally speaking. And that is that you just throw out this little hint, and generally your girlfriends get it, right? You just throw out this hint and they get it and you understand each other. You may not even say real words when you're communicating, right? You just do these weird sounds, and the guys are just kind of sitting there looking at you like, I have no idea what just happened. And so ladies, a lot of times when Roxanne does this, she'll like to throw out little hints to me, trying to get me to come along and understand where she's coming from. Let me just let you know a little secret, girls. Guys don't get hints. We don't get subtle hints. We don't get obvious hints. The reality is that if you want us to know something about you, if you want us to understand something about you, then please just communicate to us in ways you're trying to teach a 2-year-old, right, how to function with something. And so we just don't get hints. We just really don't. as hard as you try.
And something that I've noticed that you have really done a good job of a lot lately is just asking questions. And it really reminds me of a verse in Scripture, and it's Proverbs 20, verse 5. And it says, "The purposes of a man's heart are deep waters, but the man of insight draws them out." And when you ask me questions, it really makes me feel loved and valued, and helps me process through things. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, and we've been married for almost 20 years, and I have learned she does that a lot. I've learned that from her, and so that's kind of something where we've grown in that.
And so I would say right now, probably the biggest thing that you can do, in an argument is just to really stop and just ask a question, and maybe even ask God, God, what are you trying to do here? What are you trying to grow me? Are you trying to grow my spouse? What is something where we could really grow, and maybe even look a little bit more like Jesus in this?
And men, take the leadership in this. If you start feeling like tension is rising up, nothing will diffuse an argument more if you just look into your wife's eyes and say, I feel like there's tension rising. Why don't we just stop and pray about this for a minute? That just makes the whole world just kind of calm down. And if you just kind of get on your knees together and spend some time praying together. God, we're struggling here. We're having conflict. We don't like what's happening. Could you help us? Could you give us wisdom? Could you give us direction and discernment? I don't think there's anything more valuable than just stopping everything and saying, and your wife will appreciate it. She'll appreciate that leadership coming from you saying, sweetheart, let's just stop and let's just pray through this.
It's really hard to pray mad. So I think that can help.
Yeah. So there you have it. Those are 4 tips on fighting fair. And if you need to rewatch it, take notes, write these down, practice it, and see how you come out. We'd love to hear some stories from you, and we'll see you next week when we're going to talk about a huge word, not in every relationship. In every relationship, this word is important, but no relationship more important than marriage, and that's the word grace. We'll see you next week.